It's that. So we listen to it as advice. That's the key point. As advice. Advice to help us develop this, to lessen suffering and grow happiness. One way of really simply putting it. For our sake and the sake of others. Thinking like this. We'll sing a little prayer. The last two lines of which express this. And the first two lines of which are those of us who actually already identify with being Buddhists. So it's reiterating our reliance on the Buddha, his teachings, and so on. Sangye chörang soke chognam la jangchu barudak nikyap suchi Dagi churnyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shok Sangye chörang soke chognam la jangchu barudak nikyap suchi Dagi churnyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shok Sangye chörang soke chognam la jangchu barudak nikyap suchi Dagi churnyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shok. Okay. So the big picture point of view, from the big picture point of view, like I said yesterday, and it's really kind of very tasty, the point of all of this path, from A to Z, this lam rim, this gradual path, this course, this series of instructions, series of practices, series of instructions to be internalized, that culminate in becoming a Buddha. So the goal of all this stuff is to end up becoming a Buddha. Like you do a course in music, you end up becoming a musician, a violinist, a pianist. You do a course in botany, you become a gardener. You know, we understand this concept of studying something for early stages, junior school, high school, post, university, postgraduate, like that. We get it. It's how we learn everything. It's how we learn everything in a graded, orderly way. Well, that's the way that this packaging of the teachings the Tibetans have put together. You graduate as a Buddha, in Tibetan Sangye. And like I said yesterday, the etymology of that word is really tasty, and it tells us exactly what the job is. It implies, hearing the result implies the job. Hearing the result implies the method. So Sang, or Bud, implies the utter eradication from our mind of all ego and fears and neuroses and delusions and all the nonsense. And Ge, Da, Buddha, Sangye, implies the development to perfection of all the other stuff in our mind. Intelligence, wisdom, compassion, kindness, blah, blah, blah. That's it. Extremely simple concept. Not complicated concept, but a shocking concept, like I said yesterday. And because it doesn't, when we think psychology, when we say psychology, we mean Western psychology. We mean Mr. Freud, etc. That mob. That's what we mean, by definition. We would never plonk Buddhism into it. Because we put Buddhism up there in the sky with what's called religion, which is kind of, coming from on high and mystical and, But Buddha is nothing other than a psychologist. And that's not a sort of a joke. It's a literal truth. His expertise is the mind. So like we know, like we said yesterday, he came out of this extraordinary tradition that was rich and marvellous and amazing that had been going for thousands of years before him, these so-called Hindus. He went as far as he could go with them, and then he diverged in his own direction, in particular in relation to his own experiential findings about the nature of self. As His Holiness said one time, and I always quote that now. It was more than 3,000 years ago that was these amazing Indians who were the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self. Well, we smarty pants white people probably thought it was Mr. Freud, didn't we? Right? Didn't we, Aurelio? Is Aurelio here?
Yeah.
That's right. He probably thought it was Mr. Freud who began the investigation in the nature of self.
Freud, not Mr. Freud.
Oh, what, dear?
Dr. Professor Freud.
Oh, I beg your pardon, yes. He began the investigation of the nature of self. Well, no, it was these Hindus well before the Buddha, back in India, so they're the ones who all this view, the views that we talk about here, that we talked yesterday, and we'll talk more today, that we call Buddhist. Buddha didn't invent them. He didn't sort of start up, he didn't kind of come up with a whole worldview. It's the result of his observation, like we talked yesterday. So he went as far as he could go with the Hindus and then went further, he would suggest. Thus we have Buddhism. So there's different ways of, like we said yesterday, there's different ways of framing it. It is a path, it is a method to get happy and stop suffering. That's absolutely the truth. It is actually a set of ethics. It's a how to live a life of ethical behaviour. And for sure it is a method of how to get wisdom and stop ignorance. But the interesting point, in Buddhism these all come together. And this is a very interesting point. We know in our culture we talk about wisdom, we can talk about some genius scientist, some genius musician, some genius anybody who's got brilliant knowledge, literally brilliant knowledge. And we see that that's wisdom. But that person can still go home and beat up their husband, can't they? And we don't think that's surprising. In fact, because they're so brilliant, we forgive them. They're allowed to be berserk and neurotic and jump on ladies and that kind of thing, you know. These days, I think every male artist and scientist on the planet would be dismissed from the world if we start taking them all too seriously with all their naughty behaviour. I was meant to be funny. You don't laugh at me, you people. I won't go there. Anyway, okay. So then, the thing that I find so helpful to keep remembering, like the person who asked yesterday, who was it? Was it Aurelia or not? No, it wasn't. About this idea, the way we have about religion and spiritual, is that it's something you believe in, and something from on high, something coming from on high, you know. And that's why I mentioned yesterday, that's how we talk about God's law. God's law, by definition, is what God has created. Then we have natural law, and that's what we scientists, we Westerners, we modern people, we philosophical materialists talk about, natural law. Well, the Buddha, there's no equivalent to God's law. He hasn't made up anything. And that's hard for us to hear. Because as soon as we hear reincarnation, as soon as we hear prayer, as soon as we hear none, we hear religion. So we can't put these two together. But it's really helpful for our mind to try and understand this. You know? As the Dalai Lama said, if we study Buddhism and then practice it and use Buddha's methodology, if we, you know, as you go, like anything you learn and practice, you do it one step at a time. And you tick the boxes as you go, don't you? So if you came to a point in your practice and studies that you could prove from your direct experience that Buddha was wrong, then of course you would reject him. You must, it's reasonable. That's the approach. But I think most of us were intellectually lazy, and to do the work of sincerely internalizing step by step all this stuff, it's going to take a while. But we won't get results if we don't. So anyway, yesterday, so another way of presenting this entire path, this lamb rim, like we said yesterday, is the analogy of the two wings of the bird. So yesterday we discussed almost exclusively the wisdom wing. We began in the afternoon to discuss the compassion wing. So the wisdom wing is the first stages of practice, you know, the Hinayana level of Buddhism, the lower and middle scopes of the lamb rim. Junior school and high school, like I like to talk about it, which is effectively all the nuts and bolts of Buddha's views, Buddhist psychology, Buddhist philosophy. Karma, the law of karma, the law that runs the world, the law within which the world runs naturally. No one runs it. That we discussed yesterday. So to be a Buddhist one, to ourselves, that's what we have to apply. The laws of karma and then Buddhist psychology. Understand the mind, understand the distinction between the neuroses and the virtues. Get some single point of concentration. Learn to be your own therapist, as Lama Yeshe puts it. That's being a Buddhist. Daily. So putting your money where your mouth is. Consequences of that, you become more stable, less neurotic, less fearful, less attached, less jealous, less angry, less despairing, less anxious, more wise, more stable, more kind, more confident, more self-confident, more grown up, more accountable. That's literally the result. We all want to be like that. So then on the basis of this, you look around, you go, oh my God, we're all in the same boat. And that's where the compassion king kicks in, the compassion wing kicks in, you know. So if we use the lamb rim as our structure, we've done kind of, we've been implying it all weekend, or yesterday, I haven't maybe stated it too clearly. So now we move into the university level, great scope of the lamb rim, or, you know, the compassion wing. So like I said, the essence of the first part of practice, applying the law, living, abiding by the laws of karma, practice, living an ethical life, living in vows, purifying our karma every day, working on our mind, lessening delusions, growing our goodness. That's the nuts and bolts of being a Buddhist. So the main emphasis there is to protect ourselves from harming others, protect ourselves from creating more negative karma. Because every millisecond of what we think and do and say for the Buddha is sow seeds in our mind. Sow seeds in our mind. Programs us. It's a good concept. Every millisecond of what we think and do and say, Buddha says, that's his findings, is programs us. We are this work in progress. It's like if you're practicing music every day, you are a work in progress. Every single thing you do on the piano and with your musical theory, everything counts. Nothing goes astray. That's the views of the mind. So virtuous, moral, virtuous body, speech, and actions of body, speech, and mind sow seeds in the mind that produce a happy person, long term as well as short term, long term. And negative states of mind, negative actions of body, speech, and mind produce a suffering person. It's fundamental. This is the law of karma. It's not punishment, like I said. It's not reward, because there's no one doing the punishing or the rewarding. There's no concept like that in Buddhism. We're the boss. So the first level of practice is all about protecting ourselves and becoming this marvelous person ourself. We are the beneficiaries. Now we move into the compassion wing, like I said. We don't change the job. We continue to work on our mind. That never changes from here to Buddhahood. But the emphasis is different. It's now in relation to breaking down the barriers between self and other that these delusions have made up. So we began discussing yesterday afternoon. Let's continue there. So like I mentioned before, yesterday, compassion, the essence of all the positive qualities, they can narrow them down to compassion. Maybe love. People often say love is it. It's all about love. Or love or compassion. They're like the flip side. Love in Buddhism is the delight in someone else's happiness. Compassion is empathy for someone else's suffering. And then the proactive level of these is, what can I do to fix it? What can I do to help make others happy? What can I do to help others stop suffering? That's the brave attitude of the bodhisattva. So if we have compassion, then what is compassion? It's the wish that others don't suffer. So to say that, we have to know what suffering is. Like we talked yesterday, we have to understand Buddha's view of suffering. And you learn this in high school, in the second scope, the Four Noble Truths. Okay, so the Four Noble Truths, basically, there is suffering, there are causes, you can get rid of it, and then how to do it. That was Buddha's first teaching. So if we want to get compassion, like we talked yesterday, Felicity's point, very necessary point. When we say compassion now, but necessarily, we mean when you see innocent victims suffering, a few animals and a few children, maybe a few more than that, isn't it? That's what we mean by suffering. We don't see anything else as suffering. We don't see rich people as suffering. We don't see beautiful people as suffering. We don't see happy people as suffering. We only see people who are being harmed or brutalized or beaten, and there's enough of them. That's the first kind of suffering. That's the first level of suffering. And that's what the first scope, junior school level of practice is to create the cause, is to stop creating more future suffering for oneself. That's why Buddha would exhort us not kill, not steal, not lie. Because those actions of harming others are why we in this life suffer. It's very clear, Buddha's very clear about this, but it's so tortured for us when we hear all this. It's so tortured because we either have the view that, we're Christian, which means we don't have a past life because God made us, or we're philosophical materialists and we're still trying to work out why these things happen. We haven't got a reason yet. We haven't really got a proper plan, have proper understanding of it. So we just sort of think it's good luck and bad luck. No wonder we suffer. Well, Buddha's got a view, karma, We create our own reality. So the very first level of suffering is the suffering that we recognize immediately and that we know immediately we do not want. So Buddha's solution is stop harming others. That's going to create the cause for you in the future, not to get killed, not to have unhappy rebirths, not to be lied to, stolen from, hurt, etc., etc. It's very straightforward, very clear, not complicated. Of course, it takes us time to think about it and to take it as our working hypothesis because we're not used to that idea. And we can flip it over and also then go, well, I do want to be happy. What are the causes of happiness? We'll create them too. You know, we're the boss. So then if we're looking at the suffering of others then, that's the first level. So then that's the only one we think of. Within our lives too, like we talked yesterday, we looked at the second level of suffering, the suffering of change, Buddha calls it, which is what we call happiness. We call, when good things, in other words, and that's why we have to go to the second noble truth and understand the causes of suffering, and essentially attachment. From the Four Noble Truths point of view, and essentially attachment is the main cause of suffering. That's how we tried to unpack a bit yesterday. Following this misconception in the mind, this hungry little vampire in us that craves to get only what I want every second, assuming that will bring me what's called happy feelings. And Buddha says they do, it does, but they're short-lived. And then not just that, inevitably, inexorably, the experience that we label happiness, if we keep doing the action we think causes it, will gradually bring the first kind of suffering, which is the suffering of suffering. So we talked about that yesterday a bit. So if we can't see other people are suffering, it's because we can't see our own. It's very simple. And if we don't know the causes of that suffering, then we don't know the causes we haven't looked at deep enough with ourselves. Karma. So the basis of having compassion for sentient beings, even the first kind, the basis of having compassion for the animals that get hurt and the babies that get hurt and all the other people that get hurt that look like innocent victims, is understanding karma. Whereas now the compassion we have, the usual view we have of compassion is this very dualistic view of there's a little innocent victim, and immediately we find the innocent victim, we have to then find the wicked person who did it to them. And so it instantly turns to blame and anger, and then vindictiveness, and that person has to suffer. Look at our world. Look at our world. Look at the amount of anger in our world. And that's why our compassion is rooted in innocent. You have to be a completely innocent person. So that's why karma is such a heavy one for us to hear. Heavy, we make it heavy, but it's hard for us to internalize, hard for us to think it through. And the interesting point about that too is that in the irony of ego is we're addicted to the negative. So I've never yet had a person ask me the question, Robina, why do good things happen? We only ever ask about why bad things happen. And that's a very interesting point in itself before we even go further into compassion. Now it's back to understanding attachment, the subtlety, the primordial level, the level of assumption. So this gets us to attachment and aversion, the two of the three toxic emotions that Buddha, talks about, the consequences of ego grasping, the root delusion. At the deepest level, attachment is an assumption that I deserve only the good things. And aversion, anger, is an assumption that I don't deserve the bad things. Think about that and it's really evident. And it's absolutely unquestioned in all of us. It's very powerful actually. That's why the analogy of seeds and fruits, and we want to understand karma, is very powerful. Like if you have a garden, it's your garden in your backyard, and you look in the garden and you see all these weeds in it, and you don't go, who put weeds in my garden? Looking around for who to blame. The reason you don't say that is it's very simple, it's because it's your garden. So you know that what's in that garden, you put there, or you didn't take out. And this means it brings ownership, and that's what karma brings. It's huge. It's a huge concept. You don't look in your bank. How dare there be no dollars? I deserve dollars. This is a really powerful idea because you would never say that because you know it's your bank and what's in it is what you put there. We know this. It's a really incredibly simple idea. An analogy is perfect. But we all look in our life and assume, how dare there bad things happen to me? How dare bad things happen to me? The hubris of us is extraordinary. And when good things happen, this is the point, when good things happen, we take them for granted. We don't think there's a cause. So because we can't stand the bad things and think we don't deserve it, then we pull our hair out. Why is this happening to me? We all know these experiences. These are the consequence of attachment and aversion, which are constructs that we've invented. And they're so primordial. Of course, they're utterly unquestioned, and it's even hard for us to hear these words. It's quite incredible. It's very fascinating. So without understanding karma, junior school and high school, junior school, you can't really have much compassion. We can't get far. Not the way Buddha's talking. In 2003, when I was in New York, I always quote this story. And Richard Gere had invited the Dalai Lama, and he invited 20 former prisoners, all of whom had done some kind of Buddhism or meditation in prison. So a few people like me were invited. There's a whole cross-section of Americans, who'd been in prison. And they all met His Holiness and had a wonderful day, all talking about their experiences, their suffering, etc., etc. So he also invited 2 young Tibetan nuns who'd been tortured and sexually abused in Tibet. And they were talking about their experiences. Well, the first thing that was very evident, I think, to everybody, if you wanted to quantify suffering, you'd probably agree theirs was worse than everybody else's, What was evident to everyone listening was these young women weren't angry. This is such a powerful concept in our culture. They weren't angry. They weren't in despair. They weren't freaking out. And what that means is they didn't have the question, why is this happening to me? Which is the main question we have when bad things happen to us. So this is the third kind of karma, like we talked yesterday. There's 4 tracks of karma, remember? There's the type of rebirth we get, which in our case is a fruit of virtue. The second one is all our tendencies, and we have a mixture of virtuous and non-virtuous. We have anger, jealousy, kindness, love. We have good at music, good at football. We have a whole mixture. Our personality is a mixture. These are all the second way that our past habits ripen in the present. They come from our past. Mummy and Daddy didn't give them to us. They might share them, because they've done them before too. We bring our own stuff with us. The third one is where we get tortured. That's called experiences similar to the cause. The stuff that happens to us. In other words, the way we're seen and treated in this life. Think about that. It's not complicated. In this life, we either have people or sentient beings who are mean to us or who are kind to us. That's it. Think about it. Every one of those experiences is the fruit of actions we did in the past, like that, to them. Karma's personal, because karma's a natural law, so there's logic to it. That's stupendous view for our mind. We just think it's random, it's bad luck, or it's good luck. We deserve the good luck, we don't deserve the bad luck, and we don't question these assumptions. They're primordially deep in our bones, because we practice these views for a long time, Buddha says. Attachment and aversion. So these young women didn't have that. So because we assume that if you don't have anger, you're passive and strange. You're a victim. You're a doormat. No. If you have the view of karma, you don't have anger. I mean, if you really practice the view of karma, not just pretend. The experiential consequence of practicing abiding by the laws of karma and using it as a real basis for interpreting your life is that you don't get angry. This is a fact. This is logic. It's logic. You don't, because anger is, how dare you do that to me? Isn't that anger? That's anger. How dare you do that to me? Or how dare they do that to them? Those young women didn't have that. But they were sad. Tears were coming. And then, at the end, one of them said, and of course, we had compassion for our torturers, because we knew we must have harmed them in the past. And because we know that they will suffer in the future because of their karma. And this is the Buddhist view. Long-term, over countless lives, every single sentient being is experiencing the fruits of their past actions, all the happiness, all the good things, the tiniest things that have happened to us in our life, all the result of our past virtue. But we never, ever, ever question, wow, that's amazing. Why do good things happen to me? But the millisecond a bad one happens, we have a panic attack. This is really fascinating. So if we apply the law of karma as something serious, not just some interesting concept, then it has the experiential result of lessening attachment and lessening aversion, logically. Because attachment is this kind of greedy hubris that I deserve good things. And the more we get, the more we just deserve more. And we take them for granted, so we greedily just want more. Because we attachment assumes I deserve it. But you only deserve dollars if you earn them. And you only deserve flowers if you grow them. And you deserve weeds if you didn't pull them out. And you deserve nothing in the bank if you didn't save your dollars. Deserve is a heavy word, but it's how we talk. Deserve is a simple logic that if you sow the seed, you get the result. They don't use the word like deserve. We say it in a heavy way, you know. So we don't understand karma properly. And then we see someone suffering. And then we think, well, they must have harmed someone in the past. We then go, oh, well, why should I have compassion? They deserve it. Let them suffer. That's not the logic at all. That's how we can't stand to hear karma when we think of it only in terms of negative, because then we beat ourselves up and have guilt and want to kill ourselves. I'm a bad person. It's too irrational, it's too extreme. You're not a bad person. So until we've really done it properly in the first level, we can't have much compassion. It's just not possible. Because what renunciation is, like I said yesterday, is another way of putting it, as we would say it, is it's compassion for yourself. One, you now know what suffering is, and not just the first kind, but the suffering of change. And the third kind, we haven't even discussed yet, all pervasive suffering. You know what suffering is, and you know the causes. Past karma, delusions. And then you flip it over, and now you know what happiness is, and you know what the causes are. So you own both. So there's a kind of a clarity and a sanity there. And then on the basis of this, you can grow compassion easily. It's easy then to have compassion for the pedophile, for the Mr. Trumps, for the rat, for the cockroach, for the rapist, for the ex-husband. But we have to think it through. It doesn't come naturally. Because our assumptions are not these assumptions. We have the assumptions of samsara, and we have the assumptions of philosophical materialism. Not something wrong. Some brilliant things have happened in our world. So to think this stuff through, it doesn't come naturally or easily. Because the Buddha's saying everything in our mind is a bunch of views. Like we said right at the beginning, everything in our mental consciousness is a bunch of viewpoints. And we have layers upon layers upon layers upon layers of conceptual stories, viewpoints. And many of them simply are expressed at the level of emotion. And they come naturally. They can explode out of us because we practice them to perfection. So if you go beyond the emotion to unpack and unravel these conceptual stories, which is the high school level, middle scope, be your own therapist. This is the really hard work we have to do. That's when we become a Buddhist. Practicing ethics is shared by a good communist, a good Muslim, a good anybody. Working on the mind, that's unique to the Buddha, his particular way, his approach to it. And this is the basis of getting renunciation, which is compassion for yourself. Now you can move to the compassion wing and start, as we did yesterday, starting. So given that we're trying to, the next level of realization, first is renunciation, the next one is now bodhicitta. So all the next series of techniques is, and like we said yesterday, there's two main techniques that have developed over the centuries. From India to the Tibetans, for accomplishing this bodhicitta, this outrageous aspiration to never give up working with sentient beings. There's one technique that has seven little steps, and the other one is called exchanging self for others. And there's this one that we're discussing here briefly. There's a combination of both. There's 11 little points. And the first, like we started yesterday, the first is this development of equanimity. So the logic of this next step, as I said, we're trying to break down. We continue to work on our mind. That doesn't change. So here it's in reference to breaking down the barriers that we have, the ego and ego's voices, the delusions, have artificially created between self and other. So we're trying to break down those barriers. I mean, we like to hear about love and compassion, but actually when you start to think about it in this way, the way the Buddhists talk, it's kind of intense, you know. And it's not just gooey feelings. When we think of meditation, meditating on love and compassion, we think of meditating and having a gooey feeling, having some tears. That's all very nice. You know, but if it doesn't last, what's the point? We've got to use logic to argue with ego's misconceptions. All these meditations, the Tibetans, as we know, call them analytical meditations. What it is using clear logic, logical analysis, to argue with ego's misconceptions. That's what the practice is. And that's hard work. Because conviction doesn't come just from a feeling. It's too superficial. That's why the second level of practice, when we start to become our own therapist, unpack and unravel and deconstruct to the subtlest level, these trillions of conceptual stories our mind is packed with. The Buddha would say are misconceptions. They're misconceptions. They're not valid conceptions. Don't believe him. You have to prove it. It's not valid in relation to what is the really important question. In relation to what exists. So, the first of these 11, as I said, is called equanimity. And what this is where we make the shift in our mind, where we change the logic for why we would love somebody and why we would have compassion for somebody. So loving somebody, love is a virtuous state of mind. It's under the second set of the states of mind, the first lot of the delusions which we tried to work on in the first scope and second scope. Here in university level, we're now trying to continue to lessen the delusions, but to grow the virtues, to enhance the virtues. So the logic now for our loving somebody or having compassion, the logic is ego's logic. We only have compassion and love for friends. And a friend, by definition, is the object of attachment. Then we don't have love and compassion, unless we work at it, for an enemy. An enemy is the object of our aversion. And a person who is an enemy, we mightn't use that term, but a person who has stopped, who has gone against me, and now doesn't, does what my attachment doesn't want. Friends and enemies. Now the third category, we know about them too, that's strangers. And that's the vast majority of the universe. 99.99%. So what do we have in relation to them? Or who are they? So a friend by definition does what my attachment wants. And then I can afford to have love and compassion for them, because I have a vested interest. I don't have love and compassion for those who don't do what my attachment wants, because they don't deserve it, because they've harmed me. And the third category, I don't even think about them. That's what a stranger means. They don't come into our vision. And who are they? People who necessarily have done neither harm nor help. So how do we feel about them? Complete and utter indifference. And that's the majority of the world. And it's utterly natural. This is samsara, Buddha says. Ants have it, dogs have it, monkeys have it. We have our people, we have the opposite to our people, we have the rest that are neither. That's it. There's no fourth category of beings in this universe, because this analysis of the Buddhas, of the three toxic emotions, that are the summary of the 84,000 toxic emotions the Buddha has articulated, identified, that are the causes of our suffering. These three, ego grasping, which gives rise to attachment, which gives rise to aversion, that runs the universe. Join the universe here, join the club. This is being a samsaric person. So we're trying to break all this down. This is kind of extreme, going way beyond normal. So equanimity is, when we've got it, this first one, this foundation for growing love and compassion, and then bodhicitta. What it is when you've got it is this heartfelt recognition that friend, enemy, stranger are equal to each other from one point of view. They each want happiness and each don't want suffering. That's what we're trying to prove. That exactly is equanimity in this framework. It's exactly that. So you have to use logic to argue with ego's misconceptions. It doesn't believe that now. Right now, we naturally have love and compassion. It's easy to have love and compassion with the person you're attached to. Easy. Your heart opens hugely. And it's logical that it's really, when the person goes against you and harms you, it's extremely hard to even have a thought of love and compassion for them. And then the stranger, we don't care. So we don't question this. This is just normal life, normal world. And when you think about it, it's quite shocking. We should be embarrassed. It's utterly I-based. In other words, we see the entire universe through the lenses of whether or not they satisfy my needs. If they do, I adore them. If they don't, they're horrible. If they do neither, I couldn't care. They could all drop dead. So it's shocking. We should be shocked. It's totally self-centered. Utterly self-based. Utterly I-based. And the Buddha is saying no logic whatsoever. In other words, he's saying, Robina, just because, a person is kind to you is no logical reason to want them to be happy. A And just because a person is mean to you is no logical reason to not want them to be happy. These are shocking ideas. So we have to be convinced of the logic of it. But the logic here is really simple. It's trying to get out of it. It's like when we do this meditation, even as we're talking, you should be doing it, thinking these thoughts. And now, I have 3 people in front of you. To the left, you have your beloved. To the middle of eyeball to eyeball, the mean person. And everyone's got one of them to one degree or another. It mightn't be such a lot of hate. It might be just annoyance. The person at work you just get annoyed with. That's the enemy there. And the third one is a stranger. A person whose face you can stick there, but about whom you have neither aversion nor attachment. So the logic is, when we do this, we're trying to get ourselves out of the equation, stepping out of ourselves, stepping out from this, and seeing these three people objectively. To prove that they're similar to each other from this one point of view. They want to be happy and don't want to suffer. So first of all, that's hard for us, because the second we think the enemy wants to be happy, the first thought we have is, but they don't deserve it. Why? Because they've harmed me. So you use these logics to try and prove how it's not rational. Yeah, they did harm you. No one said they didn't. That's not a logical reason to prove they don't want to be happy. That's too hard for us. And the person right now who is adoring you, easy to love them because, attachment's getting what it wants. These are the drive, these are what drive it. So I looked at my iPad, and when I read my iPad, I read my news, my New York Times, and one day I read, there's a story in the right-hand corner, the heading, and it said, 350 people die in ferry accident in Tasmania. I always tell the story. And I went, oh no, because they're my people, Australians. I'm an American too. And I looked at the story, I went to read it, and then I saw that it said Tanzania. I thought, oh, it's okay. Naturally, of course I did. Then I caught myself. Oh, Tanzania, where's that? So I read the story and tried to have compassion. Of course I did. But immediately my people, immediately our people, isn't it? This is how we all are. That's the way attachment works. That divides the universe into friends, enemies, and strangers. But we don't think we do that. We think they are friends, enemies, and strangers in their bones. But that's where it's a joke, because we have to prove to ourselves it's a joke, it's wrong, it's absurd, there's no basis of logic in it. So when you're in love with Fred, attachment is running the show. He looks divine. So naturally you want him to be happy and don't want him to suffer. And then tomorrow he leaves you. Tomorrow, suddenly he goes from the friend category into the enemy category. And I mean overnight. This is where you use these logics to prove to yourself how absurd it is. When you're in love with him, you see all his suffering, you have empathy, you want him not to suffer, you're so kind, you're so compassionate. You see this person, you see all their qualities, you empathize with them. And then suddenly they leave you. Instantaneously, the next day. The pain, the hurt, the grief, the loss, the rage, and there's no way in the world you see the same thing anymore. Suddenly, and then the anger sets in, and many people gets deeper and deeper, until eventually you kill them. But the point is, look at the photo of the person the day you were adoring him, and now look at the photo the next day. No one else can tell the difference. Better see the same person. But what do we see? Look at what we see. And this is the thing about all these emotions in us and all these viewpoints in us that we take for granted, that we've got from countless lifetimes, Buddha says, that our minds are programmed with, that are in reality misconceptions. Why they're so hard to see as misconceptions is because we've had them for so long. And then this is the killer, this gets us to emptiness, that we don't even see that our mind is doing it. When I see the person I'm in love with, I don't think for 1 second that's a projection of my own mind. Not for a second do we believe that. And then when they're mean to me, and now there's an enemy there, and I see this person with daggers, there's not for a second do I think my mind has got anything to do with it. This is the part that's the killer. This is why we're stuck in samsara, Buddha says, and this is where we have to get to emptiness. This is the function of all delusions. Bad enough, as Lama Zopa says, that we see the world incorrectly. Bad enough that what appears back to us in the world appears through the filter, the lenses of our neuroses. bad enough that that's what happens. But the killer is we believe it. And that's how we're stuck in suffering. So we can hear all this, the logic of it. And that's why we have to use the logic. It's very sobering, but it takes a long time to experience the truth of it. We know that. We have to have the logic first to prove it, not to be emotional about it. So what causes me to see a person as horrible and they think they don't deserve suffering, don't deserve my love, don't, and they're not, and they see a horrible person, is because of anger. And why I have anger is because of attachment. And why I have attachment is because of ego grasping. These are all the viewpoints in our mind that we have to deconstruct. It's a huge job. It's an immense job. Unbelievable. It takes enormous courage. And this is being a Buddhist. And there's different ways of arguing. So you can think of yourself, for example. Just think of yourself now. There's you sitting here. You've got these three people in front of you. You've got your enemy to the middle, left to the friend, and right to you've got your stranger. Now switch the story around and think of these three people looking at you. They're all looking at you, and you look into the friend now. Look over to think of your friend looking at you now. And they see a gorgeous person. They're looking at you with shiny eyes, and you know the pic. If they described you, you'd read a very beautiful description, wouldn't you? Now you've got your enemy, your ex-boyfriend, who really is so hurt by you and so angry and so upset and really thinks you're horrible and nasty and mean and manipulative and everything. You read their description. You won't recognise it, will you? It'll be shocking. That's what they're seeing. That's what they're seeing when they look at you. Then look at the stranger looking at you. They're so bored by you, they can't even look at you. Because nothing drags them to you, just boring. You like don't exist, This vague, boring person they're seeing. So you read those three descriptions, and you look at their eyes, you're seeing they're the stories in their minds that they have made up about you, one person. So when the friend looks at you, this is the point now, the logic is, check how you feel. Do you want to be happy? When your friend looks at you, nothing to do with whether you're whether you're a friend or an enemy or a stranger. No, first of all, friend, enemy, stranger, you don't think I'm a friend. I'm a stranger, I'm an enemy. You just think I'm me, isn't it? You know technically you're that person's friend, enemy and stranger, but you don't, the point is we're trying to prove that a friend and an enemy and a stranger don't feel any different when it comes to wanting to be happy. That's all we're trying to prove. It's very simple. So you know if you're labelled a friend for that second and you see your friend look at you, you want to be happy and don't want to suffer. And you know when the other person looks at you with daggers, you just feel the same. And you know when the stranger looks at you boringly, you're the same. Well, just switch it over. Well, all we're trying to prove with equanimity is that these three people, whom we see as radically different now because we have the three poisons, the three toxic emotions, they're the lenses we see them through. They make up these stories. It's all artificial. Yeah, they did harm you. No one says they didn't harm you. That's not being argued. No one says the stranger didn't either. And no one says a friend doesn't help you. That's not the issue here. That's the wrong reason we use to want them to be happy or not want them to be happy. We link it to whether or not they like me. It's totally self-centered. This is very shocking for us because this is the logic of the universe. It's hard to even imagine being this way. How would you be if you thought this? We can't even conceive of it. It's too complicated, it's too hard for us, too much unpacking to do. So in other words, as we strip away attachment, aversion and ignorance, we'll be able to see very quickly what drives these three people. Beneath everything is the wish to be happy every second and the wish not to suffer. It's something very fundamental. Buddha points it out. It's primordial. The fundamental drive of every being is to be happy and not suffer. So here we're just trying to simply see the logic of that. And this becomes now the basis upon which we will gradually grow the wish that they be happy, which is love, and the wish they not suffer, which is compassion. So now, again, the logic we use is if they make me happy, I'm prepared to want them to be happy. If they don't, I don't want them to be happy. And if they do neither, I couldn't care. So we're trying to change that logic. So it's really profound already. This is the start, the first one, the first of the 11. Then on the basis of this, we start to gradually build these steps by step by step, using logic. I mean, there's 11 little techniques that have been passed down over centuries. You can make up your own stories. It doesn't matter. It's just how it is, you know. It's like when you're trying to practice music. You over the centuries, they've developed all these exercises, these arpeggios and scales that prime you ready to play the music. That's what these techniques are. They're kind of moving our mind in a certain direction, you know. So what we're trying to do here, what bodhicitta is, the 11th one, the culmination of this one. What bodhicitta is there's two parts. It's not love and compassion, it's the result of love and compassion. It's this aspiration, and it's when it's real, it's like in the mind, utterly and continuously and without a second thought, when it's perfected. When it's the first moment even of the first moment even of bodhicitta. It's automatic. One, that whoever's in front of you, it's your job. It's your job to help them. And two, the long-term aspiration to never give up, life after life after life after life. Perfecting yourself, doing this job of becoming a Buddha, because then you're qualified to help them all perfectly. So it's huge. I mean, it's huge, and it implies continuity of consciousness, karma, and all the rest. Bodhicitta is not just having a nice feeling; it's a very logical thing, and it's based upon. It's the final shift where you now have exchanged yourself for others, where others literally are more important than self. And these ideas are hard to bear in our culture. They have no kind of place, you know. So the second part of these 11 is the series of techniques that are called from this whole genre of practices called exchanging self for others, or they call it lojong in Tibetan, one term, which means literally mind transformation, transforming your mind, or training your mind. But everything's training your mind, but they've got that term for it for whatever reason, lojong. But it's exchanging yourself for others. So in the first level of practice, we were playing safe, attempting to stop killing, lying, stealing, harming. Why? Because those actions based on delusions will cause me future suffering, and I'm sick of suffering. Then we get to high school, we start to look into our mind and get to the root of the problem, which is the delusion, so we subdue attachment and therefore aversion and the other crazy ones. So we become this marvelous person. So we know what suffering is, and we know what causes it, so we get renunciation. And this is all, we're the recipient of this, we're the beneficiary. Others benefit from they'll love us now because we're such a nice person. But the purpose of those practices, of this level of practice called refraining from harming, the morality of restraint, the ethics of restraining ourselves, disciplining ourselves, stopping harming sentient beings. Now we're practicing the morality or the ethics of benefiting others. It's more proactive. So the purpose the main problem in the first level is attachment. It's framed differently here. It's called self-cherishing or selfishness, putting self first. These are difficult words. It's kind of, when we're accused of being very selfish, we're really hurt, because we know it means you just think of yourself all the time. And this is such a dilemma for us in our culture, because we think if I have to think of others, that means I don't think of myself. And then we feel a loss. We can't put this together, you know. So these teachings about exchanging self for others are really quite heavy. There's this one text, and let's go through it roughly. It's called the 8 Verses of Mind Training. I mean, Tibetans usually have very poetic titles. This is about the least poetic title they've ever got. 8 verses, it's called. This 11th century Lungri Tangpa, this yogi, a student of Dromtompa, I think, was a student of Atisha. All these teachings came from Atisha. This 11th century amazing Indian scholar, yogi, saint. He spent many years in Sumatra, in Indonesia, where Buddhism was flourishing, with his guru Salimpa. Then he went back to India, then he was invited to Tibet. Spent the last 15 or something years of his life there. So all these teachings track themselves back to the great Nalanda monastery, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th century in India. So this idea of exchanging self for others in Lungri Tampa's text, I mean, like all these things, and we like to read these prayers, and because they're all poetry. Because it's religion, we say these words without too much fear, you know, but when we read the words, they're very shocking. So the first verse alone is so shocking, it's hard to hear it, you know. So the first verse says something like, in order to make the most of all, in order to get the benefit from all sentient beings. Get the benefit from all sentient beings. That needs explaining first. Who are most dear, no, who are more precious to me, they say, than a wish-fulfilling jewel. Well, eons ago, we had things apparently called wish-fulfilling jewels. Well, forget that, please. Just say $1 million. Who are more precious to all sentient beings, who are more precious to me than $1 million. So what the hell are they talking about? We have to analyse the meaning here, because it's too shocking. But because it's religion, we just say it, we gloss it over and get a feeling. I'm sorry, these are too much. Psychologically, this is a shocking idea. What does it mean, who are more precious to me? This really needs explaining. We don't talk this way. The first line says, in order to get the benefit from, in order for me to get the benefit from all sentient beings. This sounds almost like heavy. But the meaning is very particular, the way they talk, very specific. Okay, if you wanted to become the best healer, the best doctor, the best acupuncturist, whatever you like, you're driven by compassion to help people, okay? So you would want to become the best acupuncturist, the best doctor, because then you can help everybody. So you'd have to aim to become the best doctor. You want to be the best doctor. You want to be the best doctor. So then, what do you need in order to become the best doctor? The thing you need most is suffering people. If you've never met suffering people, how can you want to become the best doctor? Because by definition, a doctor heals suffering people. So therefore, the way they say it in Tibetan, bodhisattvas need suffering sentient beings. Bodhisattvas rely upon suffering sentient beings in order to get the benefit from all sentient beings. Meaning, because you want so badly to become a Buddha, because the suffering is unbearable, then if you don't have a contact with any suffering beings, if you just sit there in a nice little place where there are no sick people, put your sign out, doctor, and no one comes, then you're not going to grow much compassion, are you? You can't become a very good doctor because you don't meet the suffering people. So bodhisattvas are like these fanatics. We can't even conceive of the level. When you start to hear about or even see the evidence of people who are like this, who have got this level of compassion, it doesn't feel real to us. It's hard for us to, we're too cynical. It doesn't seem possible. Psychologically, with our view of the mind, it seems like they're weird. There's something strange about them. I mean, the Dalai Lama, it seems to me he just shows the aspect of being a really nice, funny, wonderful person. Amazing, kind, funny. But if you look at it another way, 60 years he hasn't stopped. He's from such suffering that he has, his people, but he's like this powerful, funny, charismatic person who seems to really love everybody, who cracks jokes and is normal, but he's all the time playing down. When we read about bodhicitta, we read about what a Buddha would be, and then we think he must be that. It's almost hard to conceive of. But if you see someone like Lama Zopa, who shows a different aspect, these lamas also have different aspects. He's like outrageous. You almost can't understand it. The level of love and compassion they seem to have. We can't trust that it's true. We can't trust that it's possible. He doesn't sleep, for example, they say. He doesn't sleep. But all these things, even if you hear them all, it's hard to imagine a normal person can be this way. And then you read, even if you just read the texts, and you listen to the qualities of a bodhisattva, it's hard for us to imagine a person could be that way. We don't trust it. We're cynical. We don't trust, because a normal person, as far as we're concerned, has to have ego and attachment and anger and grief and up and down like yo-yos. That's a normal person. So this seems too weird for us. So even though we love to hear about compassion and love, when you start to analyse what Buddha's saying that we can accomplish, it's kind of shocking. So what we're talking here is a person who's even got some level of bodhicitta, they haven't even realised emptiness yet. They wouldn't have attachment. There would not be attachment. There cannot be anger. There cannot be depression or anxiety or jealousy. There cannot be. There can't be. It's not possible. There is only love. There is only compassion. There is only courage and confidence. And they have insight into minds way more subtle. I mean, Lama Zopa says, for example, so he's either making it up, or he's a yogi who sees the minds of, who has this, for whom it's real. I said this yesterday, when we talked about suffering again. When we look at animals, our little doggy-woggy, our little pussy-wussy. We only see them suffering when they're hurt. But Lama Zopa said, a friend of mine told me this years ago, he said, if just for a moment we could have a direct experience of the mind of our little dog, the suffering, and he means the mental suffering of ego grasping and attachment and aversion and all the delusions, which are 1 billion times heavier for an animal because they're not mitigated by the compassion and wisdom and kindness, which ours are. We would never have another, we would be so overwhelmed by the suffering, we would never want to waste another second of this precious human rebirth. Now that is just like science fiction for us. We can't even see if a human is suffering. If they smile at us, we just go by what we see. We're so thick in ignorance, we just go by what we see. We don't see minds, we don't see our own mind. So how can we possibly see the minds of others? This is the Buddha's approach. So this compassion they're talking about is as a result of a person who's done all this work internally themselves, and has clairvoyance, and has understanding karma, and has got incredible wisdom. So their mind is so vast, we can't conceive of it. Sees the past, sees the future, sees the minds of others, sees the karma we've created, and therefore can see the subtlety of suffering that we even ourselves can't begin to see. This is how they're talking, you know, and this is kind of hard to bear. That's what we're trying, supposedly, if we're on the Mahayana path and we say we want to be a Buddhist, want to become a Buddha, this is what we're trying to practice. It scares the life out of me. This first verse, just the first verse, they get worse as you go. In order to get the most from these suffering sentient beings who are more precious to me than $1 million, meaning because I'm so wanting to become this Buddha, because I'm so overwhelmed by the suffering of these beings who are like my precious children, whom I cannot bear the thought of suffering, unceasingly, day and night. That's why the great yogis who don't sleep, I mean, you know, it's because they're practicing, they couldn't waste a single second. Because of compassion. It's hard to think this. They're driven by compassion. Who are more precious to me than $1 million. I will only have love and I will only care for them. I forget the last line, something like that. And the next line, the next one says, and this is, I always joke about this, you know, if you're a therapist or a, you know, and you have a client and you give them this advice, the client could sue them, would sue you. The second verse says, when you're with others, see yourself as the lowest of all. And not just that, but see others as supreme. This is too much to bear. We've got to have a sort of a month of commentary on this one to get to see how this is logical. What does it mean? Who is it talking to? These verses, this whole approach called Lojong was kept secret. It was secret teachings at the time of Atisha. Secret. Because Milarepa even said, whatever's dharma is the opposite to the world. This is clear. And as Pavonka says in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, to do these practices, this extreme level of the culminated bodhicitta, you've got to be a suitable vessel. And it's obvious. That's why we have to know where we're at. If you're still at the level of being a victim and hopeless and not fair, poor me, it's not my fault, it's all my boyfriend's fault, it's the world's fault, it's mummy's fault, it's daddy's fault, I didn't ask to get born, it's not my fault, which is how we think. If we're still at that level and haven't begun to have any awareness of our mind, this practice is not for us, excuse me. And that's what we've got to understand. All these practices are incremental. We don't think of spiritual practices like more advanced, less advanced. Compassion is university level. This is a more advanced level even of that. So we can at least read these, understand the logic and aim maybe one day to be like this. But we've got to understand the meaning of it. So what does it mean, see yourself as the lowest of all? That's hard for us to hear. Basically we say, excuse me mate, I already see myself as the lowest of all. What do you want me to do, you know? So in other words, what it means is a person who is fiercely gone beyond delusions, completely under the, subdued their body, speech and mind in the first and second scopes. Not just that, but got Singapore and concentration. Not just that, they've got clairvoyance, and they've really got equanimity and all the other qualities which I've let pass to get to these ones. Unbelievable being already, astonishingly highly realized spiritual being who's truly driven by this incredible wish to benefit sentient beings. Like as if they're your precious children. It's a really good analogy. A mother defines herself in terms of she defines her life, doesn't she, in terms of her job in relation to her children. That's what mother means. So it's a good analogy. And that's what bodhisattvas are for every sentient being. So aiming to, we're moving towards that in these verses, So it's really intense. So why would you want, what is the logic, what is the practice, what is the benefit to us as a practitioner when we're with a group of people to think of ourselves as the lowest of all? Okay, the essence of the practice here, the one job we're trying to do in all these verses, the one job we're trying to do, the essence of the way of presenting the job we're trying to do in all the compassion wing is smash self-cherishing. The essence of the job we're trying to do in the junior school and high school is smash attachment. Why? Because they cause us suffering. And here, why? Because it prevents us from seeing others. So that when we understand the depth of ego grasping, and therefore attachment and aversion and the other delusions, and how they cause us suffering, and that's the point where even in junior school and high school we can't get. When we start to understand that we are the beneficiaries of all this. So when we understand that the depth of ego grasping and the delusions that are the voices of ego grasping, are so primordial, we have to use radical methods to smash them in the face. So this is for me, it was always like, I use the example of some like fanatic sportsman. I always think of Lance Armstrong. It could be Federer, it could be anybody. I mean, Lance Armstrong's naughty now. Federer's still holy saint. So anyway, it's like, I remember especially Lance Armstrong, reading an article about him. He's not happy with coasting down the mountains. He's not happy even with a flat path. He wants the toughest mountain possible, doesn't he? You get my point? And it's a joy to him. The tougher the mountain, the higher the mountain, the better the challenge. Because why? Because the end result is he'll become the best cyclist in the universe. That's just the analogy of a bodhisattva. So the tougher the more the challenge, the happier they are. That's what bodhisattvas are like. Because the depth of attachment to get what it wants, the depth of attachment to comfort, is the thing that's blocking you, and putting me first is the thing that blocks us from being the Buddha. So being a radical practitioner, you want every opportunity possible that will threaten that. This is why in this whole approach too, there's another whole way of framing all this approach. It's called transforming problems into happiness. Learning, this is where we talked yesterday about this fundamental levels of attachment. We're literally trying to shift the assumption of attachment that's addicted to comfort and then attached to being free of discomfort. We're trying to switch it over and be happy when discomfort comes. That's what they say we're trying to do in this approach. So we're trying to take what normally ego can't stand and use it to smash self-cherishing, to put atomic bombs under ego and delusions. Because that more quickly. In other words, the more sick your patients are, the tougher the challenge, but the more likely you'll be successful. So the second verse means, because the natural view of ego grasping, this is why it's embarrassing for us to hear this, the natural view of attachment and who we think we are, is that we, even if we're among friends, we can't help but find fault. We always put ourselves up, even if we have low self-esteem. This is very embarrassing to hear. When we've got low self-esteem, which is particularly related to pride, and pride is, one of the functions of all the delusions, the key function of all these mental states, these unhappy states of mind, are they embellish something. They exaggerate the status. So attachment exaggerates the deliciousness of the person or the cake, or the self, or whatever. Aversion or anger exaggerates the ugliness. Pride, we don't have to think about this, exaggerates our importance. But when that's flipped over, we have low self-esteem. That exaggerates our lack of importance. And the fact is, if we didn't have pride, we would not have low self-esteem. So when we've got low self-esteem, it's like, how dare these people out there be better than me? We've got resentment. Who do they think they are, being better than me? And then we use it to whip ourselves, you know. If we don't have pride, we would not have low self-esteem. If we didn't have pride, we'd have humility. And if we have humility, we'd be confident and content with who we are. That's a fact. But it's hard to hear this. We love to be confessed at low self-esteem. It's because we have arrogance, because we want to be more important. It's hard to hear this. But that's the logic of it, to think about. So, what we're trying to do is smash in general all the voices of ego about I, all the voices of ego grasping, which we'll get to in a second when we start to understand emptiness. Ego grasping is the belief in a fantasy I in there that is the basis of all these delusions. So all the delusions protect that sense, that I, which is made up. That's why it's all such a joke, you know. So we're trying to smash all these misconceptions. So a fantastic practice, and even if we can't think of all, when we're with all others, automatically think I'm the lowest of all, that's too much. I think a very powerful way to practice that, at work, with your friends, family. Think of one person whom you don't like, especially if you don't like. Think of one quality that person can do better than you, one thing about them that's better than yours. Cuter feet, prettier ears, nicer shape, better hair. Be simple, be humble. Better at maths, more money. Just think of one thing that's better than you. That's a really good way to practice. It's very humbling. But the fact is, if you're walking around with low self-esteem and self-loathing, this practice is not for you. So you've got to know if you can do it. But you can attempt to. At least you see the logic of it. You can try. Or maybe I'll be able to do that one day. That's seeing them as superior. This is very powerful. But you've got to understand the logical reason for that type of thinking. Not to say beat yourself up. And if you're not quite qualified to do it, if you're not capable of doing it, then, you know, don't do it. These teachings are incredible. The next verse says, basically the next verse is, you know, this is implying you've got concentration. It implies you know your delusions well from doing high school. It implies you understand the delusions intimately. And because you've got such clarity and such awareness and such concentration, the millisecond a delusion arises in your mind, threatening you and others, you avert it without delay. And this itself just demands a person is qualified, demands a person is highly advanced to have that level of awareness, you know, of their own mind. The next three verses are really intense. The next one, it seems to me it's in relation to the world, when we look at the world out there in general. And this verse says something like, when you see all the, you know, I mean, it's something like people who are evil. They say about evil people. Well, we would say psychotics. The really crazies on the planet, you know, the really maniacs. And we see plenty, because we've got so much news. Nothing's hidden from us. So whenever you think about this person, you see these people who are suffering because they're causing so much harm to others. The psychos, the psychopaths. I forget each one, I have to remember. It's something like you'll I need the verses now. Let's have a look. I forget. Thank you. Yeah. You know, when I do hear about these, it says rare. So I think back in 11th century Tibet, it would have been fairly rare to meet a psychopath. But now we just, do you understand? But they're flooding our iPads and iPhones and television screens and newspapers every single day, isn't it? I mean, the world is kind of insane. So they say here, rare. You'll hold them as a precious treasure. So again, what's the logic of this? Because the crazier, the sicker the person is, the more sick the person is, the more precious they are to you. Because here you can stretch yourself to the limit, like the high mountain for Lance Armstrong. The more sick a person is, the more marvelous they are for you, because then you can really, you know, become a best doctor most quickly. Same here for the bodhisattva. Gets worse, it gets closer to home, the next lot, and my sense is this is a bit like at work or something. When you're blamed, when someone out of envy does you wrong, or harms you, blames you, attacks you or blames you. Everyone has this. Someone at work, in your family, or a group, your group, not so much even your family, the closest. where you're accused of something you didn't do. They're jealous of you. This is so common at work. The pain of this is unbearable, isn't it? How are you going to feel about this person? You're going to offer the defeat. You're going to take the blame upon yourself and offer the victory to them. This is completely too much, isn't it? This is inconceivable to a normal person, and that's most of us. We look at most of our suffering. We might have suffering like our body gets hurt, you know. But the most pain we have on the planet, I think, is this third kind of karma where we're seen in a bad way and treated badly by others. I think that's the worst suffering we have. Do you understand? The one we call the worst suffering. That's this one. You you accept the blame and you give them the victory. You, either literally, you say it to them, or you're in yourself. This is like atomic bomb on delusions. These are all atomic bombs on delusions. That's the point. You're trying to smash delusions. And why are you trying to smash delusions? Because they're preventing you from being a Buddha. That's it. It's very simple. Why does Lance Armstrong want the best mountain, the highest mountains? Because it's going to be the quickest way to become the best cyclist. Buddha. Just the analogy. The third one is closest to home. The most unbearable. A person you've given your life for. You know, I've helped, and on whom I put great hopes, like your beloved, your children, turn against you, go against you, you know. They're your guru. You treat them like a guru. This is real, intense, full-on, unbelievable practice every single day. Because every single person, we all have these experiences. And this is the most radical way to practice. But it's based upon, you've got to be a suitable vessel. And a suitable vessel is having controlled your body, speech, with karma, abiding by the laws of karma, watching your mind, looking at your delusions, owning them every day. This is intense enough. This is the practice on the basis of that. This is intense. It's got to be a suitable vessel. So the best we can do. Do we can, you know. But understand the logic of it. Psychological logic. The reason you want to do this. Not just to become like a doormat. To smash the delusions which are causing us suffering, which are preventing us from helping others. So any questions about all that? And that's only there's 2 more verses to go. Sorry. Good, it's purification, don't worry about it. Offering the water to the Buddha. Purified my delusions, there you go. Any questions? Yes, sweetheart. Go.
I understand with the reputation part, do nothing.
A bit louder, sweetheart. It's a bit dense, the sound in here.
Sorry. So I understand the part about the reputation, why you do nothing. But to actually accept the blame, I'm not understanding how where that's helpful.
To whom?
Anybody.
This is helpful to you. These are for your sake. These practices are totally for your sake. These practices is for us to smash self-cherishing so that we can therefore help others. This is not meant to be for the other person's sake. This is for your sake. These are for you. These are your practices. These are your personal practices for your benefit, to smash your delusions, which are the bigger picture is to help you help others. That immediate one isn't to help that person, it's to help you. That's it. These are for your sake, to smash delusions, to help you smash delusions. Do you see the point?
Kind of.
So where's the problem? No, it's a powerful one because everyone has the same question. So speak it out.
Sure, the part that I struggle with is
I can't hear you very well, darling.
it doesn't help in any way the other person.
That's not the point here. These practices, this is my point, that is not the issue here. The long term, listen, if you're sitting in your medical book studying, you're not helping anybody, are you? But what are you doing? You're studying how to help people, aren't you? This is how to help, to get you to be qualified to help people. By smashing your delusions, you're qualified to help them. Can you see that point? That's the point, darling. This is private practice. You know, we don't go around saying, oh, I'm giving the victory to you. Or you don't go around saying, oh, you're my best friend because you're mean to me. No, it's private, you know. Do you understand? So when we're capable, but it's not that easy. And the point is we've got to have wisdom. Not every time it might be that. Maybe the best thing is to fight the thing. We've got to know what's right every time. And that's the wisdom we often do not have. And we get wisdom from the first stages of practice. This is where this is a minefield to really learn to know how to do the right thing in any situation when it comes to not only helping others, it has to be based on wisdom, and that's really tough for us. So in other words, a person who is, where we can misunderstand this, for example, let's say you're the victim, let's say you're in a relationship where you're the bullied person, you'd be letting the person run over you every day. You have to do exactly the opposite. You need to stand up for yourself. And that's in the wisdom wing. It's only a person who's gone beyond that who's able to do this and do it for the right reason. Do you understand? Yeah. So we're going to know what we're capable of. Yes.
Thank you. These compassionate beings who dedicate their lives to realize enlightenment in order to benefit others, when they express this in verses or prayers of aspirations, there is written, "May I do this by myself alone."
Yes.
Can you please, I don't know.
Did you hear her question?
No.
Okay, so she said when she reads the texts and things of these by these great yogis, they always, what she's saying is one of the aspirations of the bodhisattva is, may I do this by myself alone. All that means is, no matter how much work it takes, even if it's you alone with no one else to help you, you will never give up trying to help others. That's all it means. It's the enormous courage to, if you had to, you would do it on your own. That's the only meaning. You understand? It's this enormous courageous attitude. They always talk about the courageous attitude of the bodhisattvas. Yeah, that's exactly the meaning. Anybody else? Yes.
So in this country, we seem to be a doing people. And so when I hear you talk about compassion, are you always saying it's something you recognize, or is it something you always do something about, or
I
is it
understand.
a combination?
No, it's the first step. The way it's here, the first step, starting with this one of equanimity. With equanimity, we're trying to establish a sound basis for why I would want to develop love and compassion for sentient beings. So that's the first step. So then, because they all want to be happy, not because they're happy, nice to me. And then gradually, and I didn't go through all these steps, I've kind of leapt ahead. We gradually, we'll go into it now more. We're moving towards first seeing the reason why we want to make others happy. So the first has to always be the thought, may a person be happy? And that's what love is. And then the thought, may someone not come. So whenever you see someone suffering, then compassion will be, oh, look at that. It's like empathy. You see the suffering. Then from that, the next level, they call it great compassion. And you would actually call it great love. What can I do to make it happen? That's the unique one of the bodhisattva. And that has to come, but it's got to start with a thought. Do you understand? The next one, they call it literally Mahakaruna, great compassion. And that's the brave, that's the courageous one of the bodhisattva who says it's my response, it's like my job description, it's my job. That's what we're trying to cultivate. So then you do what you can. So it's compassion that makes you want to help others, but then what you do to help others has to be based on wisdom to know if it's the right thing, and that's what's the tricky part. But the next one is great, that's action. That's action, that's the action part. It can't just be in meditation. It's got to come, it's then, or even from why you would go into meditation, like sitting there studying your books all the time, then you're able to do it. So same here, in your meditation, you get some logic to it and you really work on it, but then you're able, when you get around your life, you put your money where your mouth is, you actually practice it. Do you understand? Yeah. Yes. Who else? Yes.
So I just have a brief question about karma.
Yes.
It seems like karma, in order to sort of escape samsara, it has to have this ability to be resisted, like
resisted.
In the sense that if someone does something to me because I've harmed them in a previous life, let's just say for example, do they have to have? I would think they'd have to have some ability not to do that action, or we just be sort of.
I'm lost. Start again.
Okay. So like, let's say someone, for example, harms me because of something that I've done to them.
Okay, so I punch you in the nose, then?
Right, you punch me in the nose.
Then,
okay.
Your job is what?
My job.
If we're trying to abide by, where are we, junior school?
Junior school.
Control your behavior.
Right.
So then, you have the view of karma, you try to practice it seriously, and I harm you, so then, question?
Then the proper thing would be not to
harm me back.
In anger.
Yeah,
right.
Well, not to harm you back. Yeah. At least control your body. Not even say anger yet. That's next step. At least control your body. At least control your speech and don't say something or do something. At least that's it. That's it.
I guess my question is, do they have no choice but to hit me?
What?
Like, do
Honey, it's like saying if a seed has been planted, is there a choice for the plant to grow? Of course there's no choice. You sowed the seed. If you think of it as a natural law, keep trying to remember it as a natural law like botany. So if you look in a ground and then whatever's in the garden, you planted it.
Right.
Well, then whatever arises in your life, whether a person's kind to you, if a person's kind to you, when you're applying the law of karma, you don't just greedily take it, which is what attachment would think, oh, I deserve, aren't I a lucky person? Robina's so kind to me. No, you go, wow, it's incredible, I must have been kind to her in the past. So thank you, this is fantastic. And then you think, I must do more of it. I must continue to be kind. You learn, you get learning from the weeds. You see the weeds or the flowers. You know what a flower is. You cherish your flower, so you delight that it's there because you planted it, and then you want to grow more. So when you see the weeds, you recognize you didn't pull the damn thing out, and you learn from it, and you must pull it out, and you must not grow more. Then it becomes a genuine basis for real behavior practice, not just sort of suffocating yourself. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
As Lama Zopa says, everything that goes on out there to us is our karmic appearance. It's very hard to see the world like this. And this is actually implying emptiness. It's every single thing that, since the time you're born, whatever arises in front of you. And that's why if you understand the 4 ways that karma ripens. So environmental karma, let's say from killing. Environmental karma from killing would be that you're born or you live in a really crummy, disgusting, polluted environment. The water's disgusting, the food's horrible, the air's awful. You know, I mean, that could be collective or just could be your problem. Like, you know, you look at a peanut and you die. So when you have the view of karma, you recognize, wow, that's the fruit of killing. That's the environment. And that could even be, maybe you live in a place where you're like in a war zone where dead, dying people all the time. That's the karmic result of your killing. Why, how come you got that environment? Then the stuff closer to home, how people see and treat you personally. And so they you know, so you get killed or you get harmed or you die young. That's the experience similar to the cause of your past killing. And then there's in your own tendencies, the tendency to kill. So you see these, when we understand these 4 tracks of karma, it's a way of interpreting the whole world based upon your actions. Because the same peanut can make me happy. So it really proves emptiness, but it kills you. So it's due to your killing karma that the particular thing called a peanut, which is the environment, harms you, but it makes me happy. So it proves, you know. So when you interpret everything that happens like this, everything's your karmic appearance. That's how you apply karma every second. Do you understand?
I do. I think the only thing that's tripping me up is, like, let's say for example I decide to switch it around and hit you. Would that mean like I had no choice but to do that because of your karma?
No, you're seeing it as fatalistic.
Okay, yeah, that's my problem. I'm having a hard time mentally breaking through that.
If you sow a seed, and the fruit is there, if you sow a seed, if you don't do anything about it, the fruit will ripen, won't it?
Right.
But you've got a choice to do other things to weaken the fruit if you don't want it. So that's the point. So this is where, you know, everything is dependent arising. So due to past karma, let's say, due to past karma, you know, due to our past relationship, you're generous to me. You give me $20. You know, I'm trying to abide by the laws of karma, and I interpret this. I'm delighted. I'm so grateful because you're helping me, but I realize it's the fruit of my past action. Not just to have this hubris of I deserve it and give me more, but I recognize, wow, the fruit of generosity. So it gives me the opportunity to practice more generosity. Now, if it's the negative one, and you don't give me $20, and I think you should, instead of being upset about it, how dare he do that to me, I can change my interpretation of it, and I can consciously do something different to counteract it. So if karma's so, okay, different things. If karmic seeds are so strong, okay, one person I heard about, a woman I met somewhere, she was married to a fisherman. He had a business, so she helped him run his business, so she went fishing. And then one day she was in a Buddhist course, said one day she went fishing with her girlfriend, like they used to, in the deep ocean, it's up in Queensland, where you get these fish from way deep down. And they used to like enjoying these big fish. And one day she picked one of these big fish in the boat, and then suddenly another big fish leapt into the water, leapt up and circled the boat, looking into the boat, and she was convinced it was like the wife or the husband of the fish. And she said, from that second, I never killed another fish. So that became a condition to ripen her intention not to kill. Another situation, because she had that one in her mind. Now, if that was never in her mind, would she just laugh at it? So that she couldn't have chosen to not kill in the future if that karma hadn't been there as well. Now, equally, another situation, our friend Nick in Massachusetts, on certain days in the Tibetan calendar, the lunar calendar, that are said to be very potent days for practice, they always go buy a bunch of lobsters from Maine and release the lobsters. So they bought 472 lobsters, and they were on the television, the local news. Well, the local fishermen got so angry with these arrogant Buddhists. How dare they insult our profession by saving the lobsters and putting them back in the water. They called the television news, and they went and caught 472 lobsters just to prove the point. So what that same situation, it might have made other people think I'll never kill again, but that increased their wish to kill, because that was how strong the karma was. So we've got millions of different karmic seeds. So the only way you can even learn from karma is by recognizing choice means you've got different seeds that you can begin to ripen. But, effectively those lobster fishermen have got the potential not to kill, but right at this time when the karma is so strong, effectively no choice. Do you understand?
Yes.
It's dependent arising. Do you understand?
I will with time. Thank you.
Good, okay. Yeah.
To take off on that question,
Yeah.
if the person who's about to punch you in the nose is also trying to gain control of their delusions and is able to refrain from punching you in the nose, then you still have the karma to get punched in the nose by someone else.
Well, it's so intricate. I mean, we can just be simple. If you start to learn the theories of botany, it's fairly simple. But can you imagine being one of these genius genetic botanists? I mean, or a botanist who can know the intricacies of the law of cause and effect of growing things that's so subtle. Could you imagine trying to be able to predict, if you put this now in a 70 degrees heat and this and that situation with a rose there and a flower here, in 47 years that'll happen? Forget it. But that's how subtle karma is. It's almost impossible to. But karma, if we keep thinking it's a natural law, and whatever you sow will bring its fruits unless you pull them out. That's the real point. But the intricacies of exactly what and when and how, we've just got to keep remembering it's a natural law, which is really hard because we just think of it as... So, it's infinitely intricate, isn't it? Do you understand, people? But get this up with the principles, the basic principles first, Who else? Yes, first thing.
Can you talk a little bit about when you're doing purification practice? And sometimes I have particular things that I know that I want to purify.
That's right.
But sometimes I'm just like, oh my gosh, all of it.
I understand.
Can you talk a little bit about being strategic or how to really capitalize?
I understand, yeah. I understand. We haven't really talked about the purification practice yet. I just mentioned it very briefly, but I will do it later.
Okay.
So I'll remember to do it after lunch. We'll do it then. Okay. Igor.
And just to understand that the umbrella of the karma. For example, there is a person that by impulse, by instinct or whatever.
Habit.
Yeah, but habit, just react negatively against someone else. But
Yes.
she realizes, oh my God, I don't want to do it.
Exactly.
That's one thing. But what about the people, how we kind of understand the people that at some point, they don't realize the harm they're doing to other.
Well, that's the world. Most of us are like that.
Yeah,
Most of the world is that
even,
way.
But even harming their own people
That's
in order
right.
to harm somebody else. But they are so stubborn.
That's right.
They're so blind
That's
that
right.
they don't realize what they're doing.
That's
so
right.
How can we explain that in terms of the karma with these people?
You
'Cause
can't.
So they can
We can't, Igor. I mean, okay, the fisherman is a good example, the lobster fisherman. His mind is so dug in the groove of wanting to kill lobsters that even when he sees a situation of someone being compassionate to lobsters, he takes it as an insult and then increases his wish to kill more lobsters. That's really what you're saying, that the karma is so strong in that person's mind. So then, obviously they didn't get that lesson from that experience of the Buddhists saving the lobsters, that increased their wish to keep killing lobsters. So that means the karmic imprint is very deep in their mind. So there's very little you can do to walk up to them and start giving them lectures about how lobsters don't like getting harmed. And if a person's harming us brutally, if a person is harming us brutally, I mean, plenty of people are being harmed brutally by their wives, by their husbands, we know that. That's because their karmic imprint is so strong. But the real lesson for us, which is very humbling, which bodhisattvas really have, this is very hard, is the strength of their wish to harm me is their intention, but the strength with which they want to harm me tells me how much I must have harmed them in the past. I remember as a child, I mean, I was angry. I'm angry person. I mean, I'm not being silly. It's just anger's strong. I recognize anger, especially as a kid when I was no control. And I was a bully. Do you understand what I mean by a bully? You know, I mean, there were 7 kids and I just was a bully. I bullied my sisters. I was mean, you know. I came from my own suffering and whatever reasons, doesn't matter. But I remember this particular person I met, I had such hate for that kid, this girl. This is a girl. And she was like a victim type girl. And bullies want to murder victims. Do you understand what I'm saying here? I mean, that's why I understand men who are bullies. I'm not trying to be rude because men aren't all the same. But I remember going to a prison in San Francisco. It was all these poor blokes who'd beaten up their wives, you know, domestic violence. I understand that. I'm that kind of person. I recognize it. It doesn't make me fearful. I understand it. You know, I can see the suffering of a person who's a bully, who's inside a little boy crying out. I understand that. I really understand that. So for me, it was so intense to see this girl, and I had such rage against her. I was shocked, even as a kid. I could have strangled her. So that's very personal karma, Igor. Why people get I mean, I remember hearing about some family, these fanatic Christians or somewhere, I can't remember where, in America somewhere, that had 17 children. And they tortured like 7 or 9 of them, but not the others. That's not just a random event. So the connection between 2 people is so powerful, especially when we're partners. The karma between us is so unbelievable that the monster that a person becomes, that person's shocked. I was shocked by this anger in me. It doesn't come through everybody I have. It didn't come in me towards everybody, but karma's personal. So a person we really hate, we want to murder that person. I mean, but we don't see it. We justify our reason for doing it, don't we? A person who harmed us justifies their reason. But that's what the learning for us, if we're really trying to be Buddhists, forget about compassion for them, is realizing the depth of the heaviness of the action we must have done to cause that person. And when we're, and the bodhisattvas, they have compassion for the person that is harming them, because they realize their past action of harming them is giving is one of the external conditions for why the person is so mad with them now. Are you understand what I'm saying? That's the real learning from our side, if we can be brave enough. Are you with me, people? Now, equally with good. Listen, look at Mr. Trump. I think he's the most amazing example. 50 million people adore Mr. Trump. No matter what he says or what he does, they just increasingly adore him. That's the strength of his past virtue in whatever goddamn life. Of non-lying and humility and kindness and non-stealing, that whatever he does, he's seen in a good light. That's the proof of his own past goodness. And if a person who's a totally good person, like there's always quote this example of a woman in prison, or anybody, we've all been harmed by people we didn't harm. We all know this. Hang on a second, just keep it. This for a second. But this, I remember this one woman in prison. I always quote this woman. She's amazing. She's now out of prison. She was, accused with her husband of murdering 2 policemen, and they were innocent. These innocent hippies back in the 70s. He even got executed. The husband got executed. They didn't do anything wrong. But no matter what, all the police, the judge, the jury, everybody believed they were monsters, believed they killed these 2 police, no matter what the evidence showed. That's the strength of their past negative karma. And then one day, anyway, she's an amazing example for me, because at some point she said, this is a different discussion now, a different approach to the teachings. This is the compassion side. At some point, she said, I realized I couldn't change anything. But they couldn't take my mind from me. So I decided I'm not a prisoner, I'm a monk. I'm not in a cell, I'm in a cave. This is how we deal with our own suffering, when you can't change it. But what I'm getting at, the particular thing I'm getting at here, which is something we don't think about, the strength of our karmic connection with certain people is the dynamic of what you do with each other. Okay, I had an abortion when I was 23. It's another example. I had an abortion. I'd never had one before or since. But I remember it was so curious. At the second, I even knew I was pregnant that day. I was a hippie, and I did what hippies did, and I got pregnant. And I was with this boy, and I remember at that second, I said to myself, oh no, I'm pregnant. That second, I was with this bloke. It was crystal clear to me. A consciousness had come into my womb. I didn't say those words then. So what I'm getting at is the karmic connection between me and that being must have been so strong, because even the second they entered my womb, I wanted to kill them. I wanted to have an abortion. You see what I'm saying? It was not a drama for me. It wasn't an anguish. I didn't think about it. I just knew I didn't want this thing. I didn't have hate for them. I didn't feel any aversion. I didn't even think of it as a person. I just knew I didn't want what come out the other end, a person, you know. It was very clear. Do you understand what I'm saying, people? I'm just doing an analysis here. So the karma between me and this person must have been so strong. On the one hand, due to their past virtue, they found my womb. They got a human birth. They won the lottery. But on the other hand, the extent of their karma of killing me in the past was so strong that my immediate response was, I'm going to have an abortion. And then the interesting point was this. It was in 1968, and the National Health in England, or in the UK, had just approved abortions as part of the free medical system. So I thought, oh, aren't I lucky? I went to the first hospital, saw a psychiatrist, he gave me approval, I got an abortion, they took care of me, they gave me an extra week in hospital because I got depressed. Everything went beautifully and smoothly, and I felt lucky. You see what I'm saying? So what I'm saying is, it was so everything went completely smooth. The path for this person to get killed, there were no hindrances. There were no obstacles. You see what I'm saying? That's the strength of her or his karma to get killed. You see what I'm saying, Igor? And that's the karmic connection between us, whether it's good or bad. The karma between us is already, there's a karmic connection between us. And then the strength of our own negativity from the past ripens. They're involved in it, of course. But why you hate certain people, and why you adore other people, that shows the strength of their virtue or non-virtue to us in the past. It's a very dynamic thing. It's very interdependent. We're in this, it's like in a tennis match, you know. The quality of your hits back to Federer are very much dependent on, they're very interdependent, how we treat each other. Do you understand what I'm saying, Igor? And the real learning for us for karma is about us, and that's us to learn this. Then compassion for the other person, that's a different discussion. That comes later. Do you see what I'm saying, Igor? But only when we know it ourselves and have compassion for ourselves and take responsibility ourselves that we were the cause of this and have the grave attitude of the bodhisattva, then we realize the suffering the person is causing, and we realize our role in that. Whereas when they do it to us now in this life, and we didn't do anything to harm them in this life, that's why we feel an innocent victim. So the karmic view completely changes that. Do you understand? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes. But that karma,
What?
that karma, that connection with that person,
Yes.
diluted by itself, or there is a
Is what? Is what?
diluted,
What do you mean by diluted by itself?
disappear by itself.
What do you mean to disappear by
I mean,
itself?
the constant relationship, the constant.
Oh, it'll change.
But
Karma runs out.
yeah, but by personal action.
No,
by-
karma
by
run out
itself.
anyway. No, karma runs out no matter what at some point. But the quicker we act upon it ourselves and purify it and regret it ourselves, regret the harm we must have done to that person in the past, regret the harm we've done to ourselves by doing that, regretting because we don't want this present suffering, having compassion for the person, doing the purification and vowing never to do those things we must have done in a past life again. That would purify our side of it, and it could even help affect them. Well, this is where we discuss the purification practice after lunch. But sometimes the karma is going to take a while to run out. It could be 25 years, you don't know. Because even if you work on your side, maybe the other person won't change in this life. Might be, from their side, because the karma is that heavy. Even people in prison who are being found to be innocent, it takes still 10 years for the wretched system to get them out, because there's this determination to make them suffer, which is the heaviness of their karma too. Hang on a sec. So who had a question? Earlier, yes, go.
Did you just say that you were in the hospital for a week because of depression?
Yes. I mean, I don't get depressed normally, but I know because the hospital, the nurses were so kind to me. Because what happened was, hang on, the poor child didn't get cut out properly. I had to have a D&C again. They made a mess of it, and I didn't think of it as a person. I never thought of depression. I never got depression, but I just felt very unhappy and sad, and the kind nurses gave me a bed for a week. They were very sweet. It was all free, you see.
Do you think now in retrospect that maybe you were beginning to have some remorse, some...
No, not in the slightest.
No.
No, didn't even think about it. No, just something I did, and that was it. I didn't.
What do you think that fueled your depression then?
Oh, not then. I understand it now, but not then.
Now, what's your understanding?
Well, it's obvious. It's obvious. I mean, because I've harmed a sentient being, and there's karma. I mean, karma. Even though we don't remember past lives, the flavour of it comes to us. So often, the depth of our happiness or the depth of our suffering is because of the past karma, but we can't place it. We don't know that.
Maybe you felt it unconsciously at that time.
Oh, of course I did. There's no question. It's all going on and happening, but I didn't articulate. I was gung-ho hippie, doing what I wanted to do and get the hell out of this wretched thing out of my womb so I can carry on with my life. Didn't last long, I promise. Do you understand?
That was a good sign that you felt depressed.
A good sign of what?
Of your ability for compassion and so forth.
I suppose.
Develop that.
Yeah, maybe, yeah, probably, yes, yes. Probably it was, yeah, sure, exactly. Yes, at the back there.
So, I hope this question is not ludicrous, but you mentioned Trump, and I don't want it to be a political question.
No, just a person. We're talking about human beings, okay.
But you said when masses adore...
Bit louder, darling, so sorry.
You said that when masses adore him, it's his karma from his past.
Absolutely.
Right. So what about the masses that hate his God?
Same. That's another lot. That's all the karma of his negativity in the past. Because we've all got lots of different past lives and lots of different relationships and lots of different people.
So when a person, I'm thinking now of Hitler.
Yeah.
When a person seems to control the masses.
Yes.
What exactly is going on that?
So in the same way the Dalai Lama, he's controlling millions of people. People adore him. Because he's got, so use the good example, it's the same thing, the same logic. So the Dalai Lama one would be that, as you know, let's say let's say he is what they say he is, which is a Buddha, a fully developed Buddha. Then one of the things that happens is we meet beings, we meet each other we meet sentient beings life after life after life. We make connections, don't we? And then that's one of the main causes why we keep bumping into each other, why we run towards each other like a magnet, whether to harm each other or help each other. So whether it's Hitler or Dalai Lama, they both had strong karmic connection with many millions of people who shared the same thoughts, who had the same philosophy. He didn't make them think those things. Dalai Lama doesn't force us to think like we have the seed of those thoughts in us. We hear him and he nourishes the thoughts that are already there. And all the people who adore Hitler, it's exactly the same. They all have the same philosophy as him and his presence galvanized them. But he had a very strong personal karmic connection with every one of them from many, many, many lifetimes. Same with Trump. And same with, all the Chinese communists, there are many millions who hate the Dalai Lama. Do you understand? So karmic connections are a very interesting one for the bodhisattvas. These bodhisattvas are these fanatic dudes who go from life after life after life after life, working on their, becoming a Buddha every moment of the way. But one of their main jobs is they talk about how they hook sentient beings. Consciously, they need to make karmic connections. Because if you don't make a karmic connection with somebody, they're not going to recognize you in future life. And you can't lead them all to enlightenment at one go because they're not ready. So there's always this story I tell about my mother. At some point she met Lama Yeshe. I introduced her to Lama Yeshe. And she had a meeting. She was a Catholic, my mum. And she adored her Bobsy, that's me. We had an intense relationship. Whatever. But the point is, she met him one time in Melbourne. And after the meeting, I met her afterwards, and I could tell he deeply touched her heart, right? But she was mad at him. Her pride had been really offended. She said, he kept looking at the television while I was talking. So what happened was, as Lama told me, she poured out her heart to Lama. She never did that to anybody. She was people always came to my mother. She was the one who solved other people's problems. So he made her very vulnerable. And in spite of herself, because he's very powerful, he's very charismatic, Lama Yeshe. So she was always mad at him. That Yeshe. She'd go, that Yeshe, I don't like that Yeshe, she'd say. And she'd gossip away to one friend I had. And then, talk about him, that Yeshe, she'd go. She didn't mind Zopa because he looked like he's humble, Anyway, I'd think, oh God, she's criticizing a bodhisattva, whatever. But the point is, I heard this lovely story about this bodhisattva, and these maniac bodhisattvas go from life after life after life. And they're not walking around looking like with halos. They're regular people. They could be the bloke down the road, the homeless person, the mother with 5 children. They could be bodhisattvas. We can't tell, working through there. So one of their jobs is to connect with sentient beings. So this bodhisattva was in some village or something, and the story goes like this. And he'd connected with everybody. It's a very conscious thing for them. Because you can't lead them to enlightenment now because they're not ready. So what they do, you do whatever you do. You give them a cup of tea, you say, hello, how are you? And so the best way to connect, of course, is to be nice to people. That's the simplest way to connect. When they meet you again, they'll like you. How come the Dalai Lama has millions of us who adore him? We could say that life after life, he has hooked every single one of us using peaceful methods. So when we see him again, you just can't help but like him. So he must have used really heavy duty methods because he hooked every one of those Chinese communists. They hate him because he must have used wrathful methods. So what happened is this story. In the village, he'd hooked all the people. They all thought he was nice. He had a chat, hello, how are you? Bought a cup of tea here, did whatever. They liked him. He was pleasant with them. But one old lady didn't notice him, and he couldn't leave her behind. He couldn't have no connection. So he didn't know what to do to hook her. So he discovered she had a beautiful garden. So he rode his horse through her garden, destroying it. Well, now she noticed him, shaking her fist and shouting and yelling, and he was so happy because he got her. And as the Lama who told the story said, when it comes to bodhisattvas, it's better to have a bad karmic connection than to have none. So that's pretty intense. So then I heard that, I thought, oh, my mum, I'm so happy. Because my sense is this. If she'd run the meeting, which is what she normally would have done, I love my mother, she would have been the person who hears the problems. She wouldn't have remembered Lama Yeshe. She would have felt comfortable. Her ego wouldn't have been threatened. But he somehow freaked her out. So she will not forget him. He got her. He hooked my mum, you know. Do you understand what I'm saying? So I was very happy. So the Dalai Lama, you know, we think we're so clever. Oh, we can see the Dalai Lama, aren't we? We know he's a wonderful person. It's because he's done the hard work in the past by being nice to us and hooked us. And now we're ready in the palm of his hand. He can lead us, you know. We can listen to what he says now. Because he's been so kind and compassionate over countless lifetimes. That's how they say. That's how they say. What else, people? Other questions before we have lunch? I mean, it's such a different view, you know, isn't it? It's just a very different view of the world. And it's hard to believe it can be true. Because we're so caught up in believing, you know, that our mummy made us and our mind is the brain and whatever. Very interesting. Yes.
Yeah, when you talk about your teachers being clairvoyant,
that's right.
There's just this feeling that it's so kind of impossible.
That's right, exactly.
Even, I don't
that's
know,
right.
I was wondering if you could talk
we just
about
have to,
maybe.
okay, the first step always has to be is hearing, when we hear the Buddhist teachings, the example of Buddhist teachings, is there, you've got to start with the possibility that it could be possible. And that's the first step, has to be. Because it's slightly different from our view, isn't it?
Yeah.
So in other words, it's very interesting. When there's a system, there's a series of steps we go through. They say when we're going to find what reality is, and we can see how this is working here. So the first step we're at. Let's say you're in where are we? Where are we?
Virginia.
Oh, Virginia. Thank you. Let's just think 50 years ago, not many people would have met an acupuncturist. Maybe 60 years ago. Who knows? So let's say you're brought up by a little kid with an allopathic system and you've never heard of anything else. And that's reality. It's really true. And we have the arrogance of thinking it's true, and all the other weird countries have their strange views, you know. And then you hear about these weird people who put needles. The first one is, of course, utter shock, you know. Especially if the system that we've got is very entrenched. The first thing is, this is just the arrogance of this pathetic people. What are you talking about? That's natural, isn't it? Now, if you've got an open mind, so the first level is, let's assume that acupuncture is valid. So in reference to this, the first state of mind is wrong view. Don't be ridiculous. It's not possible. That's called wrong view because and then most people never go past that one. The next one is, if you've got an open mind, and it implies that you start thinking, well, I'll look into this. So what would you do to look into something? What would you do to look into something to try and prove whether acupuncture is true or not? What would you do?
You can go to an acupuncturist maybe?
No, that doesn't help.
Learn about it?
Thank you. You'd look into the theories. You'd read and study and see if there's any literature that describes it. Now, often what happens with spiritual, we just think it's all made up by somebody. You know, I mean, all these people, Joseph Smith had a vision under a tree and someone else did this, and so we just think it's stuff that comes from a vision up there. So we can't, where do I look for reality? Now the Buddha's coming from his own experiences. That's what we have to remember. He's not a creator. He didn't make all this stuff up. We have to take that as a hypothesis. So you've got to think, well, is there literature there? Now, there's going to be a lot of literature you have to study, isn't it? Masses. So all you can do, though, is have that thought. You don't have to wish that. You don't have to want to look into acupuncture. But if you do think, because it keeps popping up, then you think, well, then you gradually, from reading about it, not just from even going to acupuncturists, that's not enough, that's okay, but you start hearing other people talk about it, you read about it, and then it starts, even that alone, you go, oh, you start to have doubt. Maybe it's true, maybe it's possible after all, and you say, no, not possible. That's called doubt tending towards the wrong view. Then you keep studying, keep checking, yes, go to acupuncturists, and yes, maybe even have a result, and talk to other people, but it's real research. Then you start to have doubt tending towards the right view because you're getting more confident. And then you keep looking, and it's a natural progress. You learn everything this way. And then as you're going along, you're beginning to get some certainty, not just based on a feeling, but based on your research. So then you eventually get to correct belief. That's powerful already. And then even further than that, you have inferential certainty, which means by this point you've studied acupuncture so deeply, you could pass an exam in acupuncture because you've got the whole theories clear. And that's my point here now. This is my huge point here, and with Buddhism. If acupuncture is a valid system, or if Buddhism is a valid system, not just a bunch of religious ideas that are random that pop up, which is how we think of religion, if it's a valid system, it has to first be coherent theoretically. And you have to prove that. So, the quick answer to you is easy. First you take the view that Buddha asserts that the consciousness isn't the brain. It depends upon the brain, but only at the gross level, conceptual and sensory. Then we have subtle consciousness. And then we have very subtle consciousness. We have these subtle levels of our capacity for cognition. And the Hindus, 3,000 plus years ago, have already mapped the mind based upon their invention of this brilliant skill called concentration meditation that enables you to absolutely, totally control and discipline the grosser level of consciousness, that enables you to get to a subtle level of cognition, which for us is completely asleep at the moment, where you can see things perfectly, you can completely control the mind, you can completely map the mind because you see it internally, and you happen to get clairvoyance. And you can get it in a couple of years if you really work hard. And it doesn't fit with the brain system. It just doesn't fit. It's insane. So that's why you've got to move you can't squeeze acupuncture into allopathy. It's a different set of rules. It's a series of different contingent things. You've got to put one aside and see if there's any coherence within that system. That's the only way you can prove anything. But you have to have an open mind. And then start with having it take it as your working hypothesis. That's how I always talk about Buddhism. For me, it's my working hypothesis. And whether working hypothesis means you're working with it. And that's why I'm prepared to find Buddha wrong. I'm happy so far, so far so good. So there's a space in your mind when you do that. Don't just hold on to it tight, believing in it. Do you understand?
Yeah.
There's no other method. There's no other way. It could be a load of rubbish. It's for you to find out. But it's quite quick. Even what I just said, it's explained. Even just what I'm saying. But you have to do that. You have to hypothesize the possibility that consciousness has got deeper levels that the brain doesn't depend upon. Do you understand my point? Mm-hmm. You have to hypothesize that possibility. And then look at all the literature. The literature from the Hindus and Indians is vast. It's not just some weird wacko thing that comes up, which is how we think of religion, made up by somebody. It's coming from experience. The literature is massive for thousands of years, before the Buddha even, and much of the Buddhist stuff is coming from the Hindus. Do you understand?
Yeah, thank you.
And there's a lot of literature in English now about past Indian science. It's a brand new idea to us in the West. There's so much coming out since His Holiness and a lot of the Tibetan scholars. It's amazing stuff being published. But it's really tough stuff to study. I mean, even if you just study some of the commentaries on the way the mind works, it's kind of really exhausting because it's so subtle, so precise, so intellectual, and not just intellectual meaning nonsense, but it's such an unusual way to because they describe the mind, not the brain. They describe the actual cognitive process itself, and it's so quite sophisticated, the explanation. It really squeezes your brain to learn it, but it's fascinating. Do you understand? It's time for lunch. So please enjoy your lunch, and then if you want to, during the period of lunch, talk about these things. It makes it part of the course. That's what I think. It'd be great if we all have lunch together, but we can't. We can't do that. So did hour and a half work well yesterday, or was it too long? Did it work well? Okay, let's do it again. So I'll see you at 2. Yes, everybody? Thank you. See your lunch differently. See your lunch as karmic appearance, but it looks delicious to you and you get pleasure from it. Think how amazing I want to offer to all the beings of the universe. And if you're a bit sick or whatever, never mind. But think your lunch as delicious, and the result will be past virtue, and then you make more virtue by thinking of offering it, and then suddenly lunch becomes special. Thank you, people. See you soon.